There's a truth that we shouldn't forget, that tyrants don't guess their limits. We teach them. Frederick Douglass said it best when he said, "Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have the exact measure of the injustice and wrong which will be imposed on them." What Frederick Douglass is laying out for us is a formula. The boundaries of injustice expand to meet the level of our silence. And tyrants, well, they watch for that silence like a signal. Frederick Douglass knew this firsthand. He escaped slavery, and then he learned to read and become one of the country's most powerful moral witnesses. He understood that oppression doesn't happen in a vacuum, but it grows wherever people choose to endure instead of resist. And here's the line that stops me cold every time. He added, "The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." In other words, the more we put up with, the more we get. So what does that mean in 2025, almost 2026? Well, right now, the Supreme Court has ruled that former presidents have absolute immunity for core constitutional powers, and at least presumptive immunity for all official acts, and no immunity for unofficial ones. And at the same time, the court overturned a 40-year precedent in the Chevron case. So from now on, judges, not federal agencies, get the final say on ambiguous laws. They can still weigh expert views, but they no longer have to defer to them. And that shifts the leverage, because while executive actions tend to move fast, at least to the tyrannical, that happens while legal challenges take a lot of time. And sometimes that delay is the difference between power being used or abused. And meanwhile, about 50 national emergencies are still active, and the Insurrection Act, a 200-year-old law that lets the president deploy troops on U.S. soil, is still on the books. And this is all legal and living. So ask yourself, what are we enduring right now? Because this was Madison's fear too. He designed a government where ambition would check ambition. But that only works when each branch and the public actually shows up. History also gives us a darker version of this. In 1933, after the Reichstag fire, President Hindenburg, yes, it's an actual person, President Hindenburg, issued an emergency decree that suspended core civil liberties. And just weeks later, the German parliament passed the Enabling Act, letting the cabinet rule by decree. One was indefinite, and the other was called temporary, but just kept getting renewed. So you take those things together, and they hardened into dictatorship. And that's not yet where we are today, but it is to say that most roads to authoritarianism aren't leaps. They are slow shifts, pushed 1 inch further every time the public stays quiet. So here's the civic test of our time. If the limits of tyrants are measured by what we endure, where would you draw the line? And what quiet, lawful act might you take today, or this week, or this year, to make sure that line doesn't move?